In this gospel reading, it is obvious that they're talking about marriage as well as the first reading when it comes to creation and how God created them male and female. And when we look at this awesome gift that marriage, holy matrimony is, it's such a wonderful gift that we have. And so, what is marriage? What is marriage and what is it for us? So today, by today's standard, a lot of people like to complain about marriage and the church's definition of what marriage is. Why does a church teach this? Why does a church teach that about marriage? I don't understand. If two people are loving each other, why can't they get married? And the questions go on. And our society goes on challenging our belief in marriage. And so in their argument, they know, and it seems to be intuitive, that the human heart knows that marriage is meant for love. Marriage is meant for love. And that's so important. And it's true. Every human being seems to know that. But what is love? What is love? What is that love that defines marriage? And we remind ourselves of those words that we were taught when we were children ad nausea. God is love. God is love. And so if we stop and think about this idea that God is love, we start to understand what marriage is about by a very fact of saying God is love. We're saying that God's very being is love. This is his very existence. So because of that, God's being defines what love is. It's not because God says so. God says so is because he's describing his very being. So God's being defines love, and if God's being defines love, then God's being defines marriage, because marriage is all about love. And so God's being defines what love is. Now, if you push that even a little bit farther, what does that mean about marriage? If God is love, as marriage is all about love, then marriage is all about God. It's about bringing God himself here upon this earth. That's what God designed it to be. And so when you look at marriage, and particularly the marital act, it's about bringing down and calling down upon your spouse the love of God, because God is love and God is the source of all love. All love gets its source from God. And so you are stewards of God's love for your spouse. And you call upon God for your spouse in marriage. And so when you start to think about it and contemplate it in that way, you start to see the holiness and the sacredness of holy matrimony. How God designed it. How God put it together, and it was not just some mere human act to say, well, I'll just make marriage. No, that's not what it's about. And so the marital act calls upon God's love for each other. And then in that, your spouse can get to know who God is. And of course, how does that define marriage? How do we get to know God? How do we get to know this love of God ourselves? It is through Jesus Christ crucified. It is because he did an act of the will for us. So a lot of times in this world, we think of love, and we think about the emotion of love and the huggy-duggy kissy-poo. But I can tell you one thing, Jesus was not feeling a lovey-dovey kissy-poo when he was dying on the cross for us. He was saying, ouch, this really hurts. You know? And so that's love, and he chose to will it. Now you think about what he said as he is dying on the cross for us. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And that was an act of the will by him to complete that sacrifice. To complete that sacrifice for love of us, for our salvation. What an awesome thing. What an awesome thing that God would complete that sacrifice as an act of the will to say, yes, I do will it. I do will to love them. These are my children. Each and every single one of them. And I choose to love them. And so marriage is called to self-sacrifice, not to self-indulge. Totally upside down way of thinking of marriage and the marital act. Totally different way. But we start to see the sacredness of marriage and how good, how holy it really is. To be able to fight for that marriage, to fight for the holiness and the sacredness of marriage and how good it is, because we can see how easily things can go astray, how people can be used. Imagine the trust if you are making yourself into a gift to the other and not looking at the other as a get. I get something out of them. They're no longer an object, but a subject to behold, to be loved and adored in that way. What an awesome gift that is. And it is in that context, it is not by fluke, that this reading ends up with children. Because children are an openness to life, openness to children are a necessary thing to marriage. It is inseparable from marriage. See, in the church, we've discovered that we want an integrated faith and we want an integrated marriage. What defines this integration of marriage? God made us both body and soul. We're not just animals, mindlessly walking about following instincts. We can choose to do things that go against our nature. Like whatever, smoking, drinking, drugs. We can choose to do things that goes against our nature and that are bad for our nature. Animals don't really typically do that. We have a soul. And then we have a body. And so God designed marriage and the marital act to be integrated in our lives. And if we separate the body from the soul in marriage or the marital act, it disintegrates the relationship, and it brings less fulfillment and maybe even lead to divorce. And this is what has been the cause of a rampant divorce nature and rampant divorce culture. How do we separate the soul from the body in marriage, in the marriage relationship? Well, one primary way of doing that is contraception. People want what they call the unitive, the soul part of it. I want the unity with my spouse. I want the emotions connected to my spouse, but I will deny the procreative part, the body part, the baby part. And so there is a disintegration in the relationship, and it brings less fulfillment in the marriage. And a lot of people, I talk to most people, they will say they know there's something wrong with it. There is something less fulfilling. There is something that they can't quite put their finger on. They don't know what it is. And after I mentioned this to them, they're like, that's what it was. I had a divorce, and I recognized. Because you imagine yourself not giving yourself totally to the other, including the body part, where the baby part comes in. Because the baby part is what makes you, it's what gives you to stay. It's the part that convicts you to say, this act of the soul, this unitive part of the act, must have consistency in the choice, in the act of the will. And if you don't have that part that convicts you in the act of the will, where the body will do what it needs to protect that relationship, you will physically do what needs to be taking place, then it will be less fulfilling, and then the relationship passes and hearts are wounded. That's why body and soul must always be together. And if you have in vitro fertilization where it prefers the procreative part of the act, but there's no unitive part of it, we know that there is something wrong there. And even when a spouse, the egg comes from somebody else, the material comes from somebody else, we know intuitively, we might say, yeah, okay, I will it. But we know deep down inside there's something wrong, and something in the trust, in the relationship is diminished. This is just human nature. This is just the nature of love, of who God is. And so to understand that, and then to say abortion, as it is pro-life month, to say, I will get rid of this child, even in cases of rape, right? Even in cases where the act was not done out of love. It is still the love of God that created that human being, regardless of the intentions of the humans involved. God's intention was through love. And so even in cases of rape, it is not acceptable to take away the life of an innocent human being because that baby did nothing wrong. And so these are the reasons why the church teaches what it does. And we start to see our own dignity by God raising us up through marriage and through the marital act. That our children can look at us and say, I truly know there is a God because God is love. And in that couple, I see God. I see love. It can be truly the experience of that child. They might not explicitly say it, but the love of spouses, the love that they have for each other, the sacrifices they make for each other, gives them the ability to say, I do believe. It has been my experience through the love I experienced through my mom and my dad. What an awesome thing that you can give to your children to be able to do that. Now, unfortunately, many people are divorced today, so what do we do with that? Live your life for Christ today. Making that will decision from this day forward to love as Christ loves. Whether it's already divorced and things are already done, there's nothing you can do about it. Choose to love as Christ has loved you because he still loves you. And he would not deny you. He would always give you that opportunity to experience his embrace. And so we endeavor to go forth today to give ourselves to Jesus Christ, regardless of our history, regardless of all the junk we've been through. God still loves us and still wants to share his love to us. But in the meantime, to support marriage, to support holy matrimony, to live that life that God calls us to. You imagine if every family lived that way that God calls us to, the world would be transformed. We can see God's plan for marriage, and not just marriage in general, but for your marriage particularly. How God has a plan for your marriage to transform the world, to bring hope to the world, that they can identify that this world is not such a dark place, to know that there truly is love, there truly is God.